we have a small part of the garden here that is, I mean, it's had some walls built and a gate. We've raised the level of the soil up a little bit so that it's probably about 30 centimetres higher than the surrounding level of the soil. Just think how good that drainage is going to be. It's the kind of area that people will stop and look at the minutiae of the plants growing there. Now, I'm filling it up at the moment, and as I said to you earlier, it's looking a bit small already. But
are you going for a particular theme? Are you looking at a particular location, geographic location as your starting point, your inspiration?
South Africa.
Oh. Hello and welcome to Talking Dirty. This time, all about the marvels of May at East Ruston Old Vicarage. Over at aforementioned garden, we have our very handsome horticulturalist, Alan Edward Herbert Gray. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm feeling a little bit chilly, actually. The wind is a bit breezy here, but it's sort of sunny periods today. We still haven't had any precipitation. Have you, over in your wonderful area of Cambridgeshire, Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson?
A few drops. So when I put, as you pointed this out when we were on the radio, and I said I went to get the bins in my glamorous life, that there were approximately 17 drops of rain. I mean, I literally could have
Yeah.
counted them. There were so few. I think overnight we had a very small shower. Very remiss. I don't actually have a rain capture device in my garden, so I can't tell you exactly how little, but not enough to make any difference. That's for sure.
We have a very old-fashioned one, but it works and it's right. It's made of copper. It was given to us as a present from some lovely person. I can't remember who brought it for us, but somebody did. And Graham went out to check it, and there was absolutely no register in there at all. So we really have still not had any rain. We might have had the odd drip on the wind, as it were, but that's all.
Well, I came finally to actually see your garden. For those of you who don't know, we managed to come and do an outside broadcast of the garden party, which Alan and I do on the radio every Sunday in East Anglia. And we brought the show to the spring plant fair at the very end of April. So I actually got to walk around the garden. And not just that, I got a solo early morning, sort of 7:30 in the morning walk with the mist rising off the plants and every leaf just covered, bejeweled in dew. Oh, it was magical. I'll try and share, some of the photos on the video podcast because I was so lucky to get to see the garden in that light and not shrouded in sea mist. I was worried that I'd come in early and it would just be one of those mornings where it's
I
grey
know what you mean.
and you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
rewarded. But I really was. It
Funnily
was
enough,
so magical.
Funnily enough, I had an email this morning about that very day because Polly, who was in the garden, she had found a tulip that was out at the time. I think it's probably finished now. And they're known as crown tulips. And what they are, they sort of come up in this kind of globular shape, and then the ends of the petals are all kind of crimped, and it's as if somebody's patted them down with their hand, so they sort of flare outwards, and they look a bit like a crown or a tiara or something like that, I suppose. And they're known as crown tulips. And she wanted to know the name of the yellow one. Well, that's a very simple one. It's called yellow crown. So I was able to tell her that. But there's loads and loads of tulips actually that we've had this year that have been different in the shapes of their flowers. Some have been twisted, some have been lily flowering, some have been parrots, which we all know. But there are some which had whiskers on the outsides of them, and, and stuff like that. And it's bizarre, but this is the way plant breeders go. They get a quirk of nature when they're breeding for a particular trait, and they think, "Oh, that looks interesting. Let's go with that." And well, you know where you are. You've got a different kind of plant or a different kind of flower, and we were trying that this year with all our tulips, and it's paid off because several people have actually said it to us in the garden when they've been visiting. We've never seen tulips like these before. I mean, where did you get them from? Where are they? Well, the answer to that is here, there, and everywhere because we do scour, various places and things. And sometimes even I have to say no because they're too expensive. Uh, but, that's what you have to do if you want to have interesting plants.
So many tulips. I was there. I overlapped with both tulips and lots of named narcissi in pots that I will come to in just a moment. But the day that we were broadcasting, it was an absolute scorcher. I can't even imagine what the top temperature was, but it felt like a hot summer's day, not even a hot spring day. I can't imagine how much irrigation and watering and hard work has gone into your garden because you would not have been able to tell that it had been suffering a dry spell when I walked round. It just looked resplendent, floriferous, bountiful, sumptuous. Oh, just wonderful.
Well, lots of that, I mean, is down to good soil preparation, I think. Because, the more you put into the soil, the better the soil becomes, and it helps to retain moisture. And don't forget that good old five-letter word, mulch,
Yeah.
mulch. Because if you put the blanket of mulch over the soil while it's still damp or while the soil is moist, it helps lock in the moisture.
So
So
you
there's
have an
all those
awful
little.
lot of containers, Mr. Gray.
Well, there's an awful lot I mean, the containers do get watered 3 times a week, I have to say. And this year we have, consequently, due to the lack of rainfall, started very early. And we have a regime where during the summer we feed at every watering, but feed at half strength. Somebody mentioned this on something I was listening to the other day, and I suddenly, oh, I know what it was. It was Barry Gayton on the radio, and I thought you pinched that from me, Barry, because that's what I've been saying for ages. Because, I mean, if you think about when you feed a plant, if you're feeding it on a regular basis, if you give it one big dose of fertilizer, that fertilizer is going to run out. So what we tend to do is lower that dosage of fertilizer, but keep it constant, which means that the plant is able to have nutrients all the way through and not stop, start, stop, start. And that's the way we've figured it out. I have no absolute horticultural documentation saying this is correct, but it works for us. And if something works for you, why fix it?
No, absolutely. Well, it was all looking wonderful, and I was literally having to sprint from bit to bit because I was slowed down by wanting to take photos, by wanting to look at labels and soak it all in and work out what plants were. The daffodils that you had, obviously, you plant such a range that plenty have gone over, but plenty were still looking wonderful, and
Yeah,
you'd get lots in a pot, some of which were aging, and it is nice to see how a daffodil bloom ages. Some of them aged particularly well. Was it Painted Desert, which is sort of yellow with a small orangey trumpet, and the trumpet
yeah,
just seemed to go so beautifully antique as it aged,
yes,
and that the bloom
yeah.
also sort of faded, but the trumpet in particular really benefited from age. It was really gorgeous.
Well, these are daffodils that I get from Scamps in down in where are they? In Cornwall. I'm looking at the catalogues as I speak, but they do have a range of daffodils, not just new ones, but the delightful old-fashioned ones, which are known as old ladies, and they do miniatures. And these are done for garden and for exhibition. So if anybody's, in a horticultural society and they want to know where to get some interesting things from to exhibit, Scamps have them. And that you can see them at the Chelsea Flower Show. They always do this resplendent stand, and hopefully we're both going on Monday, the 19th of May, fingers crossed. But they do this resplendent stand, and if we get a very hot Chelsea, they replace some of their daffodils because they're kept in deep freeze, really. Not obviously frozen, but down to such a low temperature that they physically stop growing. But it is a remarkable sight to see, and I just think that people like Scamps deserve our support because if we don't support organisations like Scamps and many other plant breeders and things like that, they will not be offering these plants to us. And it's important to get them while we can. And we like to have a selection of different ones, and I buy a little selection every year. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but enough to have daffodils in pots in that display greenhouse. And of course, the other thing that I don't know whether you noticed it on the day you were here, but I mean, quite often in that greenhouse, the scent from all those daffodils is almost overpowering. It's an unheated greenhouse, and the louver window, the push-out windows, they're left open all the time. Doors are shut on cold nights, but otherwise, it's just that little bit of extra protection that allows them to be perhaps a week or two even ahead of all the ones outside.
Yeah, and I mean the scent. I so many of the ones you bought were scented, and you're right. Scamps. When I was looking up the named varieties that I'd liked, they often only Scamps supplied them. So
Yeah.
we really do need to support them if we want to be able to buy these wonderful specialist varieties. Then we do need to support the likes of Scamps. And if you're new to this podcast and you haven't yet plumbed the depths of our back catalogue, at the moment, obviously we're in our kind of monthly East Ruston mode because I just don't have any moments. But back when I did have a few more moments, we did a special with Scamps explaining all the different, subgroups of daffodils, loads of wonderful varieties. So do go. I'll try and link to it in the video version so you can easily find it and bask in the delights of all those daffodils. Some, of course, look particularly beautiful at a different time of day. that morning and gloaming effect of white really singing when the light is less. So at 7:30 in the morning, with the morning light shining across, Irish linen, pristine white with a little green eye to it. It was jaw-droppingly beautiful. And I came past later on in the afternoon and it looked lovely, but it was just absolutely singing. It was sensational first thing in the morning.
Yeah, actually, that is one that has attracted an awful lot of attention. I mean, even later in the day, but I know what you mean. There's that early morning freshness, and the light is different, and of course, the light changes throughout the day, and you do get a different effect. But I mean, that Irish linen has taken everyone's by storm, and in particular, I get excited when somebody like Lionel, who comes to the garden every week. And Lionel is, and he won't mind me saying this, but he's going to be 93 in a few days' time. And he's still the most wonderful active gardener. I mean, luckily for him, he's got his health and strength. We still swap plants. In actual fact, I've got a plant ready to give him this week. But he particularly mentioned Irish linen. And he said, "Where'd you get that from?" And I thought, I know who's going to have that next year. But isn't it marvelous to have that? I think he is testament to the fact that gardening, providing you have your health, but gardening keeps you young, it keeps you limber, and all the rest of it. And I mean, the enthusiasm in him to have a new plant is infectious. I mean, I feel it as well. It's lovely.
There is always that's the great thing with gardening. There are so many plants, there are so many different combinations of plants, there are so many different ways of growing things. There's always something new to try,
Yeah.
something exciting. And at this point in the year, I mean, it's so exciting. It's all stretching ahead of us. Though, of course, in your 32 acres, there is so much to enjoy. What is knocking your socks off at the moment? There are a couple of the things that caught my attention, or a couple of the daffodils only that caught my attention. What is it that you're loving at the moment at East Ruston?
Well, I mean, there's the beginning of the Pelargonium season under glass, which is always exciting. And another sort of thing that I have as a passion for is epiphyllum. Epiphyllum, they're forest cacti from South America, and they have the most flamboyant flowers of anyone's ever seen. And I've got a collection of them. I don't know what they all are or what their names all are, because most of them are being handed to me as a flat leaf. And you like epiphyllums, try that one, and so on and so forth. And I've loved them ever since Granny Gray had one, and she used to bring it. It was a plain old scarlet one, but these enormous, fragrant, huge scarlet flowers, and these nectaries falling out of the flower, and it used to drip nectar onto the table, and so it always had to have its own cloth underneath it, so it didn't melt the table. I remember. But I've always had that fascination for them, and I've expanded on that, and we've got lots of those, and they have a very short season, and that got me thinking, in actual fact, because lots of flowers, shrubs, trees, goodness knows, you name it, they have short seasons, but we love them nonetheless. Perhaps we love them the more for the fact that they have a short season, because they're there like a piquant taste in your mouth, and then it's gone and there's nothing left. And tree peonies are a bit like that. We've got the most wonderful maroon tree peony. I don't know what the name of it is. I mean, it comes back every year. It's smothered in maroon blossoms at the moment, and it's looking resplendent. But probably 3 weeks and it's finished, and that's it for another year. But it has lovely sort of greyish foliage. Now, if you're clever, and I'm not always clever, but I am artful, and sometimes I manage to sort of organise it so that we grow a late flowering clematis through it. Not always, because some people seem to think the clematis are weeds and they weed them out. But I've got a particular, and you know about this because it's your colour, a particular Tropaeolum, which I love. It's Tropaeolum smithii, and it's got sort of red and orange flowers. They're small and they've got whiskers, and they're delightful. And it's a very slender, very fine twining climber with trifoliate leaves, and it weaves its way through things. And I'm going to put a couple of plants of that underneath the tree peony so that it will bloom again in perhaps July, August, and September for me if smithii gets going, and it usually does. So that's one artful way of dealing with it. But and another plant that sort of catches my eye at the moment is, it was given to me really by Beth Chatter many years ago. So it has that kind of association, which means that the plant is extra dear to me because it came from her. And it's Piptanthus laburnifolius. Now, Piptanthus it's got quite large, dark green, evergreen foliage. it's a smart looking plant, whether it's in flower or not. But this at this time of the year, it has terminal corymbs of these lovely acid yellow flowers. And I remember seeing it at White Barn, which is where Beth used to live. And I just was taken with the plant, and they hadn't gotten in. And I think I was going around the garden or the nursery buying plants, and she came past and she popped this little pot into my trolley, and she said, "There you are, no charge. I think you'll like that." And I thought, wasn't that nice? And anyway, that's how we got that particular plant. Interestingly, the thing is about it, it's a member of the pea family. And it's not easily grown from cuttings, although you can. And it's generally propagated from seed, I suppose that's what I'm saying. And I suddenly realized I hadn't saved any seed. And I was talking with Richard, who works on the plant stand here on the Saturday, and he wanted to know about it. And he said, "Well, how do you propagate it?" And I said, "Oh, seed. I forgot to gather any." And I went into the shrub and I looked, and there were some tangled old, very dried seed pods. And I took them off and I took them into the house and I ruffled about in them. And, there was a nice little handful of seed. And what I decided to do is I decided to soak the seed overnight. I mean, lots of people say don't bother with soaking seed. It doesn't make any difference, but it does soften that outer coat. And the seed shoot has got to break through that outer coat. And as the seed has been sitting on that shrub all winter, and had thoroughly dried, I thought, well, let's give it some help. So I soaked it in tepid water overnight and I sowed it on Sunday. I'll keep you posted, but I hope that we will get some germination.
I can't wait to hear. I was similarly collecting seed just because I found on the plant I was cutting, old bits and bobs, old straggly bits off of Bupleurum fruticosum, which I
Yeah.
got put onto by Val Bourne on this podcast, and is one of my favourite shrubs in the garden. And it has wonderful acid yellow flowers, not yet, lovely seeds, and then they just sat there. The birds didn't seem to have eaten them, so I gathered them just for the fun of gathering them because
Yeah.
I don't know how easy it is to grow from seed. I don't have much space to be growing it unless I just have it at the allotment. But if there are some, well, most plants, it's just enjoyable to collect the seed. It's one of those very peaceful, cathartic experiences, I think.
It is, and the other thing I was just going to add to that, when you talk about collecting seed, there's quite often people will collect seed and sow it and nothing happens, and they tend to sort of chuck their seed tray away or put it on the compost heap or something like that. But I would urge you, if you do that, not to do it. Keep it for a year at least, and just to see, because some seeds germinate better if they're sown fresh. And I don't know whether that's about Bupleurum fruticosum or not. But I would suggest that perhaps it might be something in my brain's making me
Yeah.
think that it is. And
I
so
think
therefore,
I
if
think
it
other
goes,
Buplurums are like that. So that's one of the reasons I
yeah.
think it probably is a little bit of a tricky one to grow from seed.
But the thing is, if you let it stand outside so the seed can be vernalized, I mean, they go through a cold period, and that will help it. So perhaps it will germinate in 2026.
Yeah. I love that.
Mm.
I love just having seed, trying it, particularly if you've got somewhere you can sow it in situ where it's not going to get completely, outcompeted by other
Yeah,
things, and just
yeah.
waiting to see if it happens. One of the things I love about the allotment, particularly because it gets so little cultivation, things do just crop up. You sow a seed and then you find out, oh yeah, that verbascum has grown. It took it a little while, but now it's turned
Well,
up.
we've been pricking seedlings out like mad. But before we finish on plants that are attracting my attention, there is one other, and it's a rhododendron. Now, we here on the eastern side of Norfolk, we can't really grow rhododendrons terribly well because we have a dry soil, we have a very free draining soil, and we have a very dry atmosphere. If you go to the Norfolk Broads, where the soil is peaty and buoyant, it's much more humid, and rhododendrons grow very well, but they don't in this garden. But there's one particular one, and it was grown in the Victorian period, and it's a white flowered rhododendron that was generally grown under cold glass to be brought into the big houses, when it's in flower because it's beautifully scented. Mine grew too big to stay in the greenhouse, so I just put it in the corner of the old wall garden and left it there. It's on a west-facing wall, but quite shady. And it's absolutely full of this lovely creamy, greeny white scented blossom this year. And I just think, that is a lesson to me that If people say things that plants are not hardy, well, try finding them a shelter spot so they can be perhaps lured to come through the winter. Encouraged to come through the winter because um, you quite often you'll get quite a lot of success. I mean, my rhododendron's now been in that situation for 8 or 9 years, maybe. So I can now seriously think to myself, unless we have a very, very difficult winter, that it is hardy in that situation. And quite a number of plants will do that for you if you can find the right place for it.
And in that walled garden, you mentioned pelargoniums earlier. That
Mm.
glass house at the moment is full of pelargoniums alongside coleus. And there are some wonderful flower foliage combos going on there. So there was one I sent you a photo of saying, "What is this?" And it was Pelargonium Dark Secret next to some, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if they're even named, but some sort of green edge dark leafed coleus that was offsetting it absolutely perfectly. I was very desirous of that combo.
Well, the reason we grow coleus really is down to Ian Roof, who works here. As you know, he helps us in the garden, and I mean, he has a love of coleus, and he likes making a kind of Victorian tableau in a greenhouse. And if you look at the old-fashioned sepia photographs in the Victorian period, you'll find there's lots of foliage plants, and lots of rangy old pelargoniums as well. One of the things about coleus is the fact they have such a long season because they have these bizarrely patterned leaves, sometimes in very incongruous sort of colours, really. Sometimes they're absolutely wonderful. I mean, I've tried coleus in many ways, for instance, starting them off with plugs, no success at all. I don't know why. As plants able to buy, yes, they're very, very easy once they're growing. From seed, so strangely enough, they're quite easy. I mean, Christopher Lloyd at Great Dixter always used to grow a crop of coleus seedlings and just to plant on the north side of one of the buildings in his garden every year for the summer. I mean, summer plants outside, people probably don't think of this. I mean, they don't think of using coleus in shady areas outside in the garden, and it works. It's wonderful. It works well. But in that Victorian style greenhouse, they add this kind of color and texture and everything else, and it is rather lovely. I like them, and I think they're the kind of plant that's sort of getting a bit of a resurgence, really. I think people are starting to appreciate the fact that they're useful in shady places. Now, if you want to grow a coleus out of the ordinary, I would suggest trying to get hold of one of the Kong varieties, as in King Kong, I think, because they're big and beefy and extra big, extra large, with bigger leaves and all the rest of it. And they have that oomph. So if you can get those, it's wonderful. But I buy the plants in as small plants, and we grow them on, and then we display them in the greenhouse. And we also, do remember to remove the flowers though, because coleus, when they produce flowers, they've done their work really. They're a bit like sweet peas, You've got to take the flowers out to keep them producing more and more and more and more foliage. It's a nice little job. It's one of those therapeutic jobs. Finger and thumb, a sharp nail, and off you go.
Yeah.
You do it just like that. But no, they're very rewarding plants, and I think they add very much an awful lot to the scene. And I think if you look at, I mean, take your cue from this. If you go to, shall we say, really posh gardens, and I'm thinking of people like the Rothschilds, and then we'll step up a notch, shall we, and go to the royal family. And our royal family, when they have plants displayed in their greenhouses, sometimes they use the most ordinary plants, and you think, well, what on earth's going on here? But they're using plants that have a long season, which makes sense. And coleus feature in amongst the plants that they grow. And so if there's good enough for them, hey ho.
I'm going to invest in some. I'm waiting. I'm going to buy them in when they come into my favorite local garden centre. Though
Yeah, that's the
it's
way.
it's going to be, I think. I mean, I haven't bought any special ones in because um my toddler's got very into weeding. Unfortunately, weeding involves coming to me with handfuls of things like hosta leaves. It's got a weed. Weed identification still needs some work there. So I can only imagine the temptation of coleus leaves is going to be something else. So I kind of don't want anything too special. I'm just going to buy in whatever I can get for the cheapest. Sorry to use the word cheap, Alan, but the cheapest ones I can get, so that I can. They're sacrificial. It's like nasturtiums for the caterpillars, for the cabbage whites. They're
Yeah.
sacrificial plants for the toddler.
Well, it's a very good way of doing it. But I mean, from an ordinary batch of seedlings, you will get numerous permutations of color, and you can select those that you like. And if you're very dedicated, you can keep them going from year to year by taking cuttings. I remember going to, I think it was the library in North Walsham, and I was doing a talk or a discussion or something there. And as I went in, this was in January, there was a coleus sitting on a windowsill. And I just said to the people there, I said, who grows this coleus? And somebody said, well, I do. And I looked at it, and the soil was as dry could possibly be. And I think it was that tiny little area from, going into, shall we say, hibernation and dying. They were obviously giving it just enough moisture to keep it ticking over throughout the winter. And I think that's the secret of keeping them going from one year to the next.
Yeah, and I know some people will take cuttings and try to keep those going through the winter. I just don't ever have enough time for that. But people, manage it, and it's something I always intend to do. It's on the wish list. One day I will. Now there are so many things we want to talk about. I know you're blown away by crabapple blossom. So one particular crabapple at the moment.
Well, this occurred yesterday. Suddenly there's a couple of chaps came to the garden and they came and talked to me and they said, what is the name of the crab apple over in the East Park, you see? And I said, I have no idea. Oh, well, you don't know much, but it's going happening in your own garden, you see, this kind of thing. Well, the heckles raised up a little bit, and I thought I'll get you for that, and I did. And anyway, I said I would think from the top of my head it's hupehensis, and we looked it up, and it was Malus hupehensis, and it's covered with masses and masses of snow white blossom, which is incredible. And it's again, it's a short-lived plant. It's a week with the flower buds showing a little bit of pink on the outside. 2 weeks if you're lucky without too much wind of this wonderful, wonderful sheets of blossom, and then it just falls and goes away for another year. Um, but there's a little bit of fruit to come after that, so it's not the end of the season. But anyway, so they wanted to know what that was, and I just suddenly thought, yeah, well, that's one of the ones that I remember reading about in books many, many years ago about Malus hupehensis, and we didn't have room for it at the time, so we didn't get it, but we did get it later. And then the said person came said to me, he said, "Oh, is that a what do you call it? A Paulownia growing in a pot?" And I said, "I beg your pardon, but I said, I don't know a plant of that name at all." I knew what he was talking about immediately. And I said, "Do you mean Paulownia?" "Oh, yes," he said, "that's it." I said, "Well, you're about as good as I am on names, then, aren't you?"
Talking of foxglove trees, though, yours was looking wonderful. I assume I didn't never got up close to it, but from a distance, I assume that was what was looking so glorious, kind
Yeah.
of above everything else.
Yes, it's a variety called fast blue. Where it came from, I mean, the breeding of it and everything, I don't know. But fast blue is earlier flowering, and it's also flowers with greater freedom than just straightforward Paulownia tomentosa. Now, for anybody that doesn't know what Paulownia tomentosa is, you just said it's the Chinese foxglove tree because each individual blossom is shaped like a foxglove, and it's got the same striations going into it to guide the bees into to pollinate it, and all the rest of it. It's a fantastic tree. I remember as a small child, there was one growing in Chapelfield Gardens in Norwich. And as a child, my grandmother was an avid reader of the Eastern Daily Press, which is the Norfolk newspaper. And it gave all manner of information about what was happening here, there, and everywhere. And if the Paulownia tomentosa had come through the winter, because often in those days, the resting flower buds, which had formed the previous year, got killed in the winter frost. But if they came through the winter, it was a great sort of occasion, and it had been announced in the newspaper that Chapelfield Gardens is expecting this enormous spectacle of this tree in flower, and off we'd get on the bus and off we'd come to Norwich. To be quite honest, in those days, I don't know, 7 or 8, whatever I was being dragged along. I really wanted an ice cream, and I was probably grizzling for an ice cream rather than to gaze at this tree in awe and wonder. But yeah, it's a fantastic, fantastic tree and very easy to grow from seed. And you may have to wait several years till you get flowers when you do that. But there is another way of growing Paulownia tomentosa, and that is to stool it down to a stump, or pollard it down to a stump. And if you do that and you allow 2 or 3 buds to grow and rub off all the rest when they're forming, that shoot will produce the most enormous, enormous leaves, which is a beautiful, exotic looking shrub. If you look up Paulownia tomentosa and buy seed of that, that's what you will get. But fast blue apparently is, I've just been handed a note by my co-gardener here, and it's not tomentosa, it's Paulownia fortunei.
No.
And that's the difference. So put Paulownia fortunei and then called fast blue. And we've got two. There's the one that you saw and one a little bit further on. And they are the most amazing, amazing shrubs. And I used to think, I don't know how it works because, I my memories of the one in Norwich where the buds got frosted. And I saw them when I went to America in spring. I saw them flowering in upstate New York. Now they get a hell of a lot more frost and snow than we do in this
Yeah.
country, and yet the buds had come through the winter. Whether it's a different strain that's got used to, or become hardier through, I don't know,
No, it's
time. It could
that
be.
it really was one of those things where you look up, if you ever bothered to look up and you suddenly saw in your garden this absolute beacon across the top of everything, just all
Yeah,
of those flowers. It's a shame I never managed to get round to it up close because it must have been absolutely just astonishing to see up close. Well,
yeah, it is.
like so much, to be honest, in your
And
garden.
you're absolutely right. You touched on something there. People don't look up in general. And I've seen them walking around the garden, and if they go anywhere near Paulownia tubertosa and they haven't looked up, they probably won't see it. But they will look up when they see the fallen gloves on the ground, because the spent flowers drop to the ground, and they look up and think, "Oh gosh, look at that."
It would be lovely to sit and watch people that moment of discovery as they do, look from the fallen gloves on the ground up to the
Yeah,
spectacle of the tree.
absolutely. Yes,
Quite a nice
yes.
sight to see. I mean, you must get that all the time in your garden. You are always busy, you're eyes down doing your own work in the potting shed, wherever you might be. But there must be the odd moment when you actually get the chance to just see people without them knowing they're being observed
Yeah.
happening upon plants they've never seen before. I mean, that is the glory of your
Or
garden. There are
yes,
just
yes. Or
so many
you.
things.
I mean, there's Graham and I in this garden. You get one or the other of us sort of seeing something or going past something in the garden. You ring each other and say, "Have you seen the so and so?" And he did it earlier on this year when there's a double flowered form of the gorse. The common gorse that you get on railway embankments and commons and places like that. But this is a double flowered form, and it has the most remarkable scent, and the scent is of coconut. And until you experience it, you think it's, oh no, it can't. It'll be so silly. But it does. It's scented of coconut. And when you get a big enough, I suppose this applies to all scents in the garden, you need enough flowers to make that scent, cast itself on the breeze so that you can smell it for some distance. But I mean, the gorse is absolutely full of flower. You can smell it before you get to it. It's lovely.
There was a lot of lovely scent in your garden and a lot of really punchy colour. I mean, your Smyrnium, I'm always so in awe of your drifts of Smyrnium, and it just offsets different plants so well. It was next to some very bright begonias somewhere
Yeah,
when I was walking along, and the
I
whole
know
pink
exactly where that is.
acid yellow combo, just I had to stop. Like, oh, quick, take a picture, marvel at this combo.
Well, my th theory is, and I think I'm fairly right on this, and that is that acid to lime green, they're great leaveners. And if you let's say you put a magenta flower and an orange flower next to each other, they'll clash terribly. But if you interplant them with something with lime green or lemon flowers, or as acidic as you possibly can bear, they will leaven those two colours, and it just works. Lime green is a great leavener of all sorts of colours and things. In actual fact, green is my favourite colour, which is quite good for a garden because there's a lot of it there, isn't there?
There is there is a lot of it about.
Hmm.
There are so many things we want to touch on. Tell me about Madeira black parsley.
Oh, go. Melanoselinum decipiens. This is a
That's why I said
strange.
black parsley, by the way.
Yeah, it comes from Madeira. It's known as the black parsley, but it's a big lumpy plant, and it's big in all its parts. In actual fact, it's an umbellifer, as is parsley. And you get this tree trunk that stands there for the first 2, 3 years, maybe, building up enough strength until it flowers, and these big, big sort of raggedy leaves coming out. It's a bit like an untidy palm tree when just before it's about to flower, and then up comes this rosette of flowers, this great wall of leaves, like a great chunky middle thing thrusting from the middle of the flower. And then all these wonderful flat panicles of pink buds appear. And it is like a big candelabrum of pink buds. And then these open to the creamy pink flowers. And then, of course, it sets masses of seed. And then, of course, it dies because it is a monocarpic plant, which means, that from seed to flower can take more than 1 year. It can take 5 or 6 years. But once it's flowered and done its stuff, like Echium pininana is another one, and they're flowering at the moment. Once they've done their stuff, they set seed, copious quantities of it, and they die. I don't necessarily. I have done it this year because I've collected some young plants because it sells seeds, not hugely, but a little bit. And I collected some young plants from the gravel around the mother plant, and I potted them up. But normally I just let the seedlings that fall into the bed, one or two of them grow. That's all you want because it's a big plant, takes up lots of space. I let those seedlings grow, and then they flower, and then I save some seed to give to other people or to sow for ourselves, and off you go again. It's a marvelous plant.
Mm.
It has architecturality. It's a big, punchy plant, and it looks good in flower, out of flower, and in seed.
Well, that's the win. I mean, talking about your echiums, that's one of the lovely things with them. If you have the space or the kind of style of gardening to leave them as carcasses, that they're even quite fun because you've got the whole life
Yes,
cycle. Then I remember seeing that at Hensted Exotic Garden in Suffolk.
yeah.
Just this idea of the whole life cycle of the echiums being there, and I'm quite excited at the mention of echium because I got a text from Joe Sharman of Monk Silver earlier that just said echium on village sign bed because we live in the same village, and he is responsible for the new planting at the village sign, which is always a joy because I walk past it multiple times, a day probably. But I haven't yet seen the echium, so I'm quite excited for my next trip down to the shop or the allotment because I can look out for the echium.
Well, take a photograph and send it to me because I'd like to see it as well.
What echium is it? What has he put in
Yeah,
the bed?
exactly. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
the expectation! I can't wait to go out. I need to go down to the greengrocers, so it might speed my journey there. We might have to move on to Flomo, I suppose. And of course, my Flomo, which, if you've never watched one of these before, is the fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant, hence Flomo. I have lots. I mean, my whole phone is full of it from walking around your glorious garden. But, there was one little plant, considering we all know I'm not really allowed to do much gardening at the moment. There was one I thought this is potentially attainable because it's just a little annual to grow from seed, and I know you can get it from Chiltern, so it's very much something I could get. And it was the little Nemophila, the little blue. What are they called? Baby blue eyes. The
Yeah.
little blue flowers, white throat to them. Pretty simple, but they really stopped you. You'd walk past your containers where you've got all kinds of fabulous things, and this little blue flower would be peeping out. And it made you want to go in and look at it, even though it was surrounded by all kinds of fabulous things. I can't remember if you've grown that a lot in the past, if that's always part of your displays, but for whatever reason, this year, that really drew me in.
No, it's not part of our regular displays, to be quite honest. But it's just one of those plants that I was doing, or have been doing for several years now, what old-fashioned gardeners used to do years ago, and that is they used to sow hardy annuals in the latter part of the summer and into the autumn. I mean, I'm talking about plants like cornflowers and love in a mist and Shirley poppies and those kind of things. And we used to sow them late and we grow them on and then we bed them out. And I did this with a number of things, including the Nemophila this year. And we potted them on perhaps in September or even October. And then they stayed out throughout the winter outside without any protection whatsoever. I mean, they could have died. I didn't know what was going to happen. We just did it as an experiment. And of course, they survived really rather well. And so, what we've been able to do, we've been able to plant in between lots of our very early spring plantings, these hardy annuals. So they'll take over from the spring plantings and you'll have early hardy annuals. So you'll have cornflowers and love in a mist, etc., coming through all your borders, which means before you go from the transition to spring to summer, you've got an extra month, which we need. So we're getting a little bit of extra interest going there, and it extends the season, and it stops the garden going flat and then full of ebullience again. And so, instead of all those early spring things dying off, they're then overtaken by these other hardy annuals. Corn marigold is another one with bright yellow flowers. We did it with that as well. But I mean, it's well worth doing. And I always think that if people if they thought about it, if they sowed a few seeds, let's take cornflowers for instance. If you've got a nice container, if you don't want an awful lot, you just want one or two things. Sow a pinch of cornflower seed and prick them out, or sow them in individual cells, and then pot them on individually. And in a container, it could be a smallish container, but I always like to go as big as I possibly can with the containers because it's got more soil, and you'll get better growth from it. And if you plant these cornflowers in a large container, 5 or 6 to a container, they will grow probably 4 feet tall. So remember to have some nice bamboo canes and some nice twine to tie them in with, and support them. And they will flower for you in April, May, and June before all the really blousy bedding gets going. But it's there, and it's there very early, and it will thrill you. And the thing about cornflowers is, don't forget. I mean, look at the king. That's his favourite buttonhole. When you're passing outside your front door, you've got a ready buttonhole made. Just snip one off, stick it in your buttonhole, and off you go. King for the day.
They are hard to beat. I mean, cornflower blue, one of the best
Mm.
colours in the garden. Have you got anything in particular you're flow mowing over at the moment, Mr. Gray?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say. There's so many things that I flow mo over at different times. But I did see one particular thing on the internet because Polly, who emailed me this morning, wanted to know the name of the tulip yellow crown. I was looking at the crown tulips, the whole race of those crimped ones, and there was one particular mixture. The name of the mixture escapes me, but basically, it's a creamy white flower and it's striped and flecked with maroon and red. And I thought, whoa! And this is a flower that's a bit chameleon-like because it changes, and takes on redder tones as it gets older. It probably opens creamy white with a few streaks of red or maroon on it, and then that spreads. And I love a flower that mutates like that. It's a bit like Rosa Mutabilis that opens pale cream and then gets darker and darker and darker. I love things that change like that.
And actually, if you are a tulip fan and you don't follow Jane Ann Walton, I know I just fangirl over her all the time, this wonderful Norfolk gardener and her fabulous Instagram, Jane_Ann_Walton. Look her up because she is one of those people who grows the florist's tulips, which are extremely rare. And the amount of time and effort that goes into growing these virus, very specialist plants is a lot. It's a lot of work for people like us to be able to enjoy them via her
I
Instagram.
know. Richard Hobbs is another person
Yeah.
that Richard and Sally Hobbs, they grow these old-fashioned florist tulips as well. And if anybody's in Norwich or in the Norwich area, do go along to the Wall Garden in Little Plumstead and have a look because they have a collection of these tulips growing there, and you can see them, in the flesh. And the only way that I think you can't buy these tulips because basically they are infected with a virus. And I think probably the only way you can obtain these tulips is by exchange by joining the Tulip Society, and I think it's up north somewhere, in the north of England somewhere. But do look it up and have a look. And they're often called bizarre or broken tulips.
Yeah, they're wonderful. And of course, if you go to Jane Ann Walton's Instagram around about the time this goes out, you'll be able to look back at all of the auriculas that she's been sharing because, of course, she has this fabulous collection of auriculas. And I'll try and link to the auricula special we did with her if you want to grow them. Loads of
She's
tips
even
and varieties.
she's even bred her own varieties, hasn't
Yes,
she?
yes.
Which I mean, that's exciting, isn't it? I mean, that's the testament to a good plants woman. I think that you can actually say that. I mean, she denies all this. She's a very modest woman, but I mean, she's cleverer than she makes out.
Yes. Well,
There's no
she's
flies in them, I'll tell you.
she has named a beautiful one. I will see if I can get
Yeah,
permission to share that on here because it was a really gorgeous one. I should probably name more than one, but one for sure I saw that was a really beautiful that we should share.
there's very interesting things that she said in conversation with somebody, and this is about the Hedychium or the ginger trials that we're doing in conjunction with the RHS at the old vicarage at East Ruston. And she said, I don't know why they asked me to be on the committee because I know nothing about gingers. And I think it was the trials woman said, well, isn't that exactly the point? Because you're a plants woman and you understand plants, you're able to look at them with a fresh eye.
Yeah,
And that's a logic, isn't it?
yeah,
Very
absolutely.
simple logic, but true.
And nice to get a little glimpse of Graham as at the very end of the podcast. Seeing as he has contributed things once or twice over the course of the program, so you can
Yeah,
give our love,
exactly.
you can give our love to Graham. And you can give our
Will
love to
do.
your glorious garden, which it was so nice to clap eyes on and just bask in. Thank you very much for the early morning quiet time that I had. It
Well,
was just what I needed.
it was just what you needed, yes, but I think I can honestly say thank you for coming with the radio because it was just what we needed, because everybody appreciated it so much. And I think I was quite astonished. We had this little kind of sort of thing of questions and answers and all the rest of it, which you chaired, and I think I was quite astonished by the amount of questions that we had. It was amazing, and the general public love it to see. Well, they want to see what Thordis looks like as well. I mean, they hear these dulcet tones on the radio and they want to see what this Norfolk grown girl looks like.
That's why I had to wash my hair especially and put some makeup on. What about that? No,
Yeah, well,
it was just a delight. It was really one of those wonderful, wonderful days in the year when just everything comes together and the sun shines and you have the best time. So if you came along, thank you very much. And of course, you can tune into us on the radio, plug of the week, every Sunday 11 till 1. Usually Alan, me, someone else.
you're doing plug of the. I'm going to do another little plug. We have a plant fair coming up again at East Ruston. Can't guarantee the radio will come because I mean there've been ones. They can't keep coming. But we have one coming up on June. I think it's June the 7th,
Yeah.
and it's on a Saturday this time. So put that in your diary. We have a huge number of stalls on the second one. It's much busier than the first one. But we're pleased to say that we've got people coming that we've admired for a long time, like Madrona Nursery, who's coming up from Kent, Steve Edney from No Name Nursery with Lou. All these people bring some such interest and inspiration with them, as does Dan Cooper Garden. The tools and the things that he's curated on his stall are absolutely fascinating. I remember last year I went to an event where he was, and I'd mentioned a weeder that he had on his stand, and he said to me afterwards, he said, "But did you mention that weeder?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" He said, "I sold out thanks to you." Well, there you are.
You also, I think, might have mentioned it in the EDP, and
Yes.
he was talking to me. He said, "Which one of you mentioned it? Was it on the radio? Was it in the paper? Because I keep getting all of these orders from East Anglia, and it was you. You mentioned it in the paper." And so yeah, but
Yeah.
Dan Cooper, wonderful guy, wonderful things, lots of niwaki, lots of beautiful little bowls to put frogs in and display your blooms that you've grown, all the sorts of things that
Thordis, can I
delight.
stop you? Please stop. Please stop. I must stop you and ask you to define a frog, but it's not that. It's not like Jeremy Fisher, is it?
It's not very frog-like at all, unless frogs have become much more sort of spiky than I remember them being. But yes, those lovely weighted things with spikes out of them that you can then pop your flowers onto at the bottom of it. So you can have a lovely shallow bowl and have all of your blooms artistically poking this way and
They
that.
also have lovely glass ones, sometimes colored glass, with holes in so that you can
Yeah.
stick stems into them. And the trick to using them is because they're quite weighty, you put them in the bottom of a vase. If your vase is very open, I would advise you to get some of this. It's like blue tack, but it's a florist thing. And you stick it on the bottom, put your frog down onto it, and then you make a framework of woody stems with these holes in the bottom. And then you can poke through the woody stems, which act as a framework to make a wonderful, wonderful display.
Yeah.
Constant Spry won't have anything on you.
So if you're lucky enough, I assume I'll be working on that Saturday, but if you're lucky enough, what an event to go along to for the June plant fair at East Ruston. It's fabulous. And fingers crossed, more sunshine.
Yes, hope so.
Well, until next time, until we will be recording a June special, happy gardening, everybody. Enjoy May, and may your gardens be bountiful and blooming beautiful. Happy gardening.
Till next time. Bye bye.
It was hilarious. I was all on track, had the little man. I told him, if you go in your crib and when you wake up, Amma will be here. Amma being my mum. And so he just became absolutely intent on going down for his nap. He was like, "Put me in my crib, put Theo in his crib." So I was like, okay, well, I'll go with the flow. And then as I was getting him into his sleeping bag and stuff, I looked out the window and they were literally getting out angle grinders.
Oh, God.
I was like, you've got to be kidding. All right, where is it? There it is. It's there. It's there. I think the camera, I need to move the camera along.
Hello, sorry.
Oh, slow. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good idea. Let's all do it. Elephants unite. Elephants are us.
Sorry, I've just been handed a name. Don't you love it? Well, if you look up